I live in Asia and just purchased a new house. Now, the previous owners were family friends who needed cash urgently and haven't been living in my country for nearly 3 years. So I got it for a great price in the middle of the capital city. Something that's practically unheard of these days. The sale was finalized at the start of this month, and I moved in right after. The house was definitely a fixer-upper, as the previous owners had left mid-renovation. The front door wasn't even secured properly, just held shut with a padlock. No real lock, no proper security, nothing. There wasn't even a gate, meaning anyone could just walk right on in. And on my very first day, someone did. Sort of. When I arrived, I found a motorcycle parked in my garage. Just there, like it was someone's personal parking space. I simply pushed it onto the road and had a gate installed that same day. Later that evening, a furious man came banging on the gate, demanding to be let in. I didn't even answer. I just watched from my window as he angrily pounded on the gate for 15 straight minutes before finally giving up, unlocking the bike, and wheeling it away. So, yeah. My first impression of the neighborhood wasn't great. After that, things were quiet for a bit. A few neighbors continued treating the place like it was still abandoned. Some would park right in front of my gate, which was frustrating. But once I put up a bold, no parking sign, that behavior stopped too. I was starting to settle in, until last week. I was in the shower when I noticed something odd. The water pressure was much lower than normal. At the same time, I heard my next door neighbor's water pump running. Now this neighbor, an old man, lives on the ground floor of a 3-story house. He rents out the upper 2 floors to tenants. Here's the kicker. He had already expressed his unhappiness about the house being sold. Apparently, he had grown accustomed to the property being vacant and wasn't thrilled that someone had actually moved in. My friends, the previous owners, had warned me about him. Said he was a cranky old man who liked to insert himself in other people's business. But I'm not exactly easy to intimidate. I'm 6 feet tall, live alone, and I have 3 big dogs. Not the kind of person you mess with casually. So I wasn't worried. Now, in our city, most houses use a water tank and pump system, since municipal water pressure isn't strong enough to supply multi-story buildings directly. So when I heard his pump going while my pressure dropped, it raised an eyebrow. Could be a coincidence, but maybe not. I waited until his pump shut off, and then turned on the taps again. Lo and behold, my pressure returned to normal. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. See, the water bills for this property had been inexplicably high over the last couple of years, even when no one was living here. We had chalked it up to some minor leaks and faulty plumbing. But now, I had another theory. This old man was siphoning my water. At some point in the last 3 years, he must have quietly hooked his system into my lines. Maybe during construction, maybe even earlier. But he was definitely stealing water. And likely saving himself the monthly fee, while I unknowingly footed the bill. I couldn't find where exactly he had tapped into the system. He probably hid it well. But after several repeat tests, it was obvious. My water pressure only dropped when his pump ran, and I had had enough. Now, water is cheap in my country. We're talking $5 a month, even with 3 dogs, a garden, and regular car washes. But this wasn't about the money. It was about entitlement. About someone helping themselves to something they had no right to, just because they assumed there'd be no consequences. So I made a plan. It was almost too easy. No grand schemes, no illegal maneuvers, no confrontations that could spiral into arguments or legal trouble. All I did was turn off the main water valve to my house. That's it. A small, quiet act. No trespassing, no breaking anything, no direct accusations. just a single, deliberate twist of a handle. I waited for the perfect moment, the kind of moment that wouldn't arouse suspicion, but would still make an impact. I knew his pump had a pattern, a regular schedule based on how the tank on his roof was being refilled. It usually kicked in every night around the same time, when the water level dropped enough for the float valve to signal the pump. So that night, just after sunset, I waited in silence, lights off, dogs settled. The neighborhood was quiet. I could hear the faint mechanical hum of his pump beginning its cycle. That's when I acted. I walked out back, opened my utility box, and flicked the water valve to the off position. Just like that, the flow stopped. But not for me. I had already stored enough water in my tank for the next day or two. No inconvenience on my end. But for him, disaster. You see, here's how these systems work in most of our homes. When the tank on the roof begins to empty, usually from showers, cooking, or regular use, a float inside the tank drops with the water level. That float is attached to a switch, and when it lowers past a certain threshold, it triggers the water pump to draw more water from the underground supply and refill the tank. The system is automated, elegant in its simplicity, but also extremely vulnerable if tampered with. When the water doesn't arrive, because, say someone turns off the water at the source, the pump continues to run believing it's just taking a little longer to fill the tank, but it's running dry. There's no water entering the pump chamber. The motor overheats, the pressure builds, and if left long enough, the entire electrical system can become overloaded, especially in a house like this, where the wiring hasn't been updated in decades. You could practically smell the dust in the just walking past it. So I waited. At first, nothing. Just the soft hum of his pump in the distance. A gentle whirring in the night. But then, a few hours later, around 3 a.m., the chaos began. It started with flickering lights. Not in my house, in his. One of his tenants, a young couple, stumbled out onto the balcony above his unit. They were clearly agitated, trying to flip switches, muttering to each other in the dim light of their phone flashlights. Then, the voices got louder. The second tenant, a college student who lived alone, came downstairs and joined the chorus of confused, increasingly angry discussion. Apparently, their entire electrical circuit had blown out. No lights, no fans, no charging, and more importantly, no water. The pump had failed, badly. There was no water in their rooftop tanks either, because the dry line had failed to fill them. They were left with nothing, in the middle of a hot, humid night. This wasn't a 1-hour inconvenience. It was a total system failure. I could see it. They step outside looking disorderly. Probably woken up by all the noise. He tried to calm them down, waving his hands and claiming he didn't know what had happened. He went back inside, probably to check the fuse box or the pump controls. A few minutes later, a small puff of smoke was visible from behind his house. His main power fuse had exploded from the constant draw. By morning, things had escalated. The young couple were already packing bags. They weren't yelling anymore. They were cold, decisive. The college student made a call to the police, and a formal complaint was lodged. And here's the thing, our laws are very clear. Electricity and water are classed as essential services. If a landlord is found to be neglecting these services, either by failing to maintain systems or through outdated infrastructure, it's a finable offense, even without a court order. You can challenge the fine, sure, but you have to pay it first. The burden is on you before you will be right. He didn't even try to challenge it. The fine, $500, a brutal amount, especially for someone living on a pension in a northern region. It didn't stop there. He had to refund both wasn't salvageable. And because of these issues, he was prohibited from renting out the units until everything was brought up to code and inspected by the city. So in one night, he lost everything. His income, his tenants, his reputation in the neighborhood, and even his independence. I overheard him on the phone a couple of days later, telling someone, presumably his daughter, that he had no choice but to come stay with her until things settled down. She didn't sound thrilled, from what I could gather. That's when I saw him come to my gate. He didn't ring the bell or shout. He stood quietly for a moment, staring at the locked gate, then gently knocked. I went to the window, watched him. He waited, then looked up and said, calmly, "Did you happen to turn off your water recently?" His voice was almost too soft, controlled, like he was trying hard not to sound accusatory, but still fishing for confirmation. I walked out, met him at the gate. I didn't smile, I didn't scowl, just neutral. And I said coolly, "Yeah, one of the pipes to my tank had a leak. Had to shut off the mains overnight. Plumber came by the next morning and fixed it." He stared at me, just for a second longer than usual, then nodded. "Oh, okay," he said, and turned away. That was it. No more words. But I saw it in his eyes. He knew. He knew I had figured him out. He knew I wasn't some oblivious new homer. He knew that I'd struck back. Not with shouting, not with threats, not with the law, but with quiet, deliberate retaliation. He couldn't prove anything. He couldn't complain. He couldn't accuse. Because doing so would be admitting he had illegally tapped into my water line. Checkmate. Next week, I've scheduled a licensed plumber to come by and inspect the entire property. We'll be sealing off every potential outlet that leaves my land. I'm also getting a full layout map done for future proofing. I won't let this happen again. Ever. And you know what? I feel absolutely zero guilt. Because this man thought he could get away with it. Thought he was entitled to what wasn't his. Thought I wouldn't notice, or wouldn't care, or would be too afraid to push back. He was wrong. All it took was a flick of a valve, a simple, effortless move. And then I just let karma do the rest.